been mentioned, as has been mentioned, July is Disability Pride Month, and you may or may not have heard of that before. But my hope is that over the next 15-ish minutes, you'll gain a better understanding about one example of disability in the Bible and how that could impact you in your church and the way you think about disability and disabled people. But as we go along, I want you to think about this quote and reflect on it. It's from one of the books I'm going to recommend at the end. I think Becca is going to attempt to put it up while I'm talking. And the quote is, "A church where disabled people are not only welcomed, but needed." So are we a church where disabled people are not only welcomed, but needed? I want you to consider if that reflects your own congregations, wherever you find yourself across the Northwest today. So some of the issues I touch on here will be fairly light touch. Necessarily, otherwise we'd be here until next week. But I'm happy to chat afterwards. I'll stay on the call if anyone wants to discuss things further. And if you think of something later, I'm happy to answer questions later on. And I've got Phil on standby with a shepherd's crook to pull me off if I go on a bit too long. So a little about me and why I was so excited when Christy asked me to share a message with you today. I come at disability theology from a number of angles. And they all sort of join together in one big, enthusiastic, chaotic explosion of passion and pride. Firstly, I come at it academically. I'm a massive nerd, and I'm loving the opportunity that training as a deacon is giving me, as I now have a legitimate excuse to consume all of the research on this and find new ways of looking at things. There's so much out there written, and I encourage you to have a look as well. Secondly, kind of anarchically, I see myself in the Jesus who sides with the underdog, the oppressed, the marginalized. Time and again, we see Jesus coming to challenge social norms and to turn the world on its head. He's unafraid to call out injustice when it's present. And finally, and probably most importantly, personally, I have a disability. Not one that you can see, but one that affects me and my family on a daily basis. I've seen the way that a life can be changed dramatically and very quickly over time, to raise seemingly insurmountable challenges. I've seen the pain and suffering that a disability can cause, the uncertainty, the worry, and the material hardship. I've prayed with a friend in her 30s who's sometimes unable to get out of bed due to her disability. I've visited my disabled sister on her 5th hospital stay in 6 months. I've watched a friend's mum slowly decline into a terminal condition and being told there's nothing more that can be done. But I've also seen the unbridled joy in the face of a young person with Down syndrome as they worship through movement. I've been so moved by that friend's powerful preaching. I've watched my sister raise 4 amazing neurodivergent children and seen the strength of will it takes just to get through the day. Disability is all of these things at different times, sometimes in the same day. But it's also real life. It's waking up in the morning, whatever that looks like. It's going to work or school. It's raising children, seeing friends, having hobbies, hopes, dreams, and fears. Despite it being in so many ways out of the ordinary, it's also very, very ordinary in others. Amy Kenny's book, who I'll talk about at the end, I highly recommend you read. It explains this very, very well. And so back to the biblical text before I become too self-indulgent. This is one of my favourite stories about a disabled person in the Bible. Not because of the specific disability, and not because of the inspirational story of him overcoming some huge odds and conquering his own personal mountain. And not really because he gains his sight for the first time, though any story that shows Jesus' miraculous power is good by me. It's his relationship. It's that the healing isn't just physical, it's spiritual too. and it involves the whole community, or it could. The man is made right in his relationship with Jesus, separate from regaining his sight. It's not dependent on that. This miracle doesn't say you have to have the typical body or mind to be restored and loved by God. And it shows some of the reality of living in an ableist world, which echoes through 2,000 years. So the unnamed man in this story, he's just sort of living his life, isn't he? He's not forging ahead with some heroic acts, but neither is he living in a pit of despair, paraded around for sympathy. This isn't inspiration, it's real life. And this is when he's approached, potentially without his consent, that's never made clear, and discussed without the chance to have his input. Jesus simply walks up to the man and, in a rather gross way, cures him. Often those with disability in our communities, our churches, are given no agency. They're seen as the passive recipients of help, or worse, pity. They participate in projects or groups. Support is done to them, not with them. I wonder, when was the last time someone with a known disability ministered to you? I also wonder how we sit with the story in which Jesus removes agency from a disabled person and potentially does something to them without their consent. I don't have a nice answer tied up with a bow. I invite you to consider it for yourself. Does Jesus know what's in this man's heart and his desire for a cure because he's prayed it? Is this an example of God sitting with us in our suffering, in our everyday, and listening to our lament, then acting? If you want to take the quote off, you can do, Becca. I was just needing that for the beginning. I don't know if people would rather actually see somebody talking to them. It's entirely optional. You'll notice I use the word cure here, not healing. It's a very important distinction in the disability world. The words may seem synonymous, but there is a subtle but huge difference. And here's where I have to walk the Johnny Cash line between a sermon and a sociology lecture, but I'll be brief. Again, check out the Amy Kenny book that I'll talk about later for a better, more in-depth explanation of this. But what we're looking at here is the difference between the medical and social models of disability. Curing talks just of the medical symptoms. The person themselves is changed because their body or mind don't fit into society. They are seen as the problem. The cancer is gone, the person can walk, the blind person sees, but nothing else changes. The community or society is absolved of all responsibility. This man is cured, his sight is given to him, and Jesus could leave the miracle at that. And in other miracles he does. It'd be no less miraculous. But the only thing that would change is this man. Regardless of who sinned, the message would be that his body was wrong for not working in a typical way. In Roman society, disability was seen as a curse or a personal failing. Sometimes slaves were even maimed by their masters in order to mark them out or stop them leaving. So if you were disabled, it wouldn't be unusual to ask why. Perfect, symmetrical, fit and healthy body was all that mattered. I wonder if you can relate to that to today at all. Healing, however, is a much more holistic change. The social model of disability changes communities. It changes hearts and minds of others. But it doesn't mean the person has to change. A person can receive healing and be supported to fully engage with society, but still have a disability. We see this in other biblical characters. Paul retains a thorn in his side. Moses retains a speech difficulty, for example. We even see Jesus after his resurrection living with a physical disability. We know he retained the marks in his hands and his side, so we can assume he had the ones in his ankles too. And that kind of ligament damage would leave him in significant pain and would leave you or me unable to walk. If you look at the second half of this reading, you see that he is reinstated in his relationship with Jesus, with the living God, yet he's not offered the community holistic healing by his community. Now, I'm not suggesting this man didn't want to be healed or cured. In a time where the only way he could survive was to beg on the streets, and his place in the world would only be secured by things like marriage and a profession, I'm sure he would have done anything to fit in and be part of society. Similarly, I'm not decrying the desire to find a cure for cancer or to do relentless physiotherapy so you can walk again after a stroke, or to pray that a blind person will be healed, to see again. These are all life-changing things and would make many lives so much easier. But they're not the only issue at play here. A person unable to walk again after a stroke is as much human and as much loved by God as any of us here, and I'm sure we can agree on that. I wonder what our churches could or should be doing to enable people with disabilities to feel needed just as they are. So we come back to the question at the start, and I'll be honest, it makes me squirm a little bit. Who sinned, this man or his parents, to make him blind? Imagine, without even acknowledging his presence or humanity, this man is reduced to his symptoms, which are blamed on wrongdoing. And this can be a pervasive idea in some Christian communities, hopefully none of ours, that sin is the cause of disability, and specifically of mental illness. And if we just choose to live a more godly life, we too can have the perfect body-mind. But that's not reality, is it? You can be the most devout Christian and still be disabled. It also speaks of two different issues. First, it sees disability as a curse, something negative. And while there are many challenges that come with a disability, they're also part of who we are. And we are more than a collection of symptoms. The second is that another's sin can affect you. And while my parents and this man's may well have sinned in a great many ways repeatedly, there is nothing they or I or he or you could do to separate us from the love of God, as it says in Romans 8. So there is nothing they or I or he or you could do to cause God to afflict us. To suggest this reduces the God of love, who cast the stars into space and who knows every hair on our heads, to a petty child who wants revenge. If this man's parents could be responsible for his illness, surely they and others in the community can also be responsible for helping him heal. Surely we all have a responsibility to each other in wellness and in healing. And maybe that healing doesn't look like regaining sight or the ability to walk or a permanent cure from schizophrenia. Maybe healing within a community looks like making sure our churches are fully accessible, including the pulpit or lectern, and listening to those for whom it's needed. Maybe it looks like the community offering practical support, like cooking a meal or offering friendship. In his relatively short response, what Jesus does here is sever the link between sin and disability. No one's sin made this man blind. It's used for God's glory. And how amazing that yet again, Jesus didn't choose the most whole or the societal ideal to reveal God's glory. He used the outcast, the marginalized, the underdog. How do we emulate that in our services? Maybe we look upon the noisy autistic child who's stimming loudly as glorifying God in their own praise. Maybe we celebrate the wheelchair user who maneuvers with surprising grace in their own way and make space for them. Maybe we provide a range of ways to engage with music for those with sensory difference, such as repeated chants that are easy to learn and remember, or have words in Braille or sign language. Maybe we consider the language we use and avoid using disability words as negatives. In the middle part of the reading, there's a lot of toing and froing between Jesus and the Pharisees and the man and his parents. I just want to pick out one point from this middle bit, and that's that repeatedly people don't believe his story. He tells them Jesus has given him his sight, but they try to find alternative reasons. Maybe he's a different person altogether. And this is an issue that faces many disabled people even today. They're not believed, especially if somebody has an intellectual disability or communicates in a non-standard way. Their account of their symptoms and wishes are less commonly trusted than would be an able-bodied person. If someone in your church, or life more generally, who has a disability or is a carer, tells you what's happened to them, tells you our church further marginalizes them, please, I beg you, believe them. As an aside, this is multiplied if the person also faces other forms of oppression, such as related to race or gender or sexuality. So continuing to the end of the reading, Jesus hears that the man has not found healing within his community. So much so they've cast him out. He's almost in a worse place socially than he was before. But Jesus specifically goes to find him. I like to imagine you can almost feel Jesus' frustration at this point. How many times have I told them they can't just love the easily lovable? So he gives the man a challenge to follow him, to trust him, and one to which he rises immediately. This man's whole life has been rearranged in a really short space of time. His whole identity changed. But immediately, without hesitation, he puts his trust in Jesus and worships. Something I wish I could say I did as my first response. And this is an offer that Jesus makes to the whole body of Christ, whoever we are. Because that is what we are. Together, we make up the body of Christ. As Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12, the body has many parts, and none is less important than another. So we come back to the quote where we started. Are disabled people welcomed in your church? But more importantly, where are they needed? It's my hope that the North West England district will lead the way in creating spaces where disabled people feel needed and are proud to call us their church. And little by little, we can make a huge difference and be a bit more Christ-like along the way. So if you could put the books up on screen, Becca, because I've got a few books. If you want to know more, these are really good places to start. There's loads out there, so have a Google around. There we go. So this first one, the Amy Kenny one, My Body Is Not a Prayer Request, is fabulous, and I recommend everyone reads it, Christian or not, quite frankly. But it's written by somebody who lives with a physical disability and talks about real life experience. It's very accessible. It's also available on Audible if you'd rather have a listen to it, as is this second one, Disability and the Church by Lamar Hardwick. Lamar is an autistic pastor in the UK. And this one's really helpful if you are in any way involved in leadership in your church. It's great because it gives practical strategies. And the Timothy Good one is a bit more academic. So it's probably not a bedtime reading one. But if you want to dig deeper into the issues that affect it and the theology behind it, it's a great one to go for. And so I invite you over the next week or so, or longer, to pray on what you think you and your church can do further to make sure that disabled people aren't just wanted, aren't just welcome, but are needed. Amen. So we're going to go into our next song, which is God, Our Anger at Injustice.